Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's edition of our Tech Tuesday webinar series. My name is Kevin Marhini, and I'm the digital marketing specialist here at Coretek Services, and I'm the host of the series. Joining me here today, we have Clint Adkins. He is our Azure or the director of our Azure practice here, and he'll be walking us through this presentation. But before I hand it over to Clint, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. As always, we are recording today's webinar, so if you were unable to attend during the actual presentation itself, no worries. We'll be sending out a recording so that you can view it on demand at your convenience. Or if you want to refer back to anything you've seen here, you'll be able to do that as well if you were here in person. We also will be having answering any questions at the end of the webinar, so feel free to use the GoToWebinar chat feature there to submit any questions. We do save some time at the end of the presentation to go over those as well. With those two items out of the way, Clint, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you and let you walk us through the presentation you've prepared for today.
All right, thank you very much, Kevin. And thank you everybody who's in attendance today. Today, we're gonna be talking about Azure migrations and broken down into 5 key steps from a methodology perspective. We'll be talking, answering some of key questions that we get asked when customers are starting to look at moving into Azure, such as how do you get ready for a migration to the cloud? How do I stay on top of my environments once I've migrated to make sure that I'm really controlling my cost and governance? How do I know what I should just move as is or modernize them, and what is modernization? And then also, what factors should you consider as you build your business case? So we'll talk a lot about all these kind of questions that are common when organizations are starting to look at migrating to Azure. So as we get started, we're going to talk about common terms within Azure migrations. You have, as you're starting on the left, you have traditional on-premise infrastructure. So what that means is that you manage, as the customer, you manage the entire stack of infrastructure, from data center, ping, power, pipe, all the way up to networking, storage, servers, virtualization, OS. You manage the whole gamut. As you start moving into the cloud, one of the first steps is moving into infrastructure as service, or IaaS, it's commonly referred to, where Azure or Microsoft manages the networking, storage, servers, and the virtualization layer, so that you're only responsible for the operating system, patching, maintaining, securing the operating system and the applications and data above it. So whether the applications or middleware, you own that, or you can leverage a managed service provider such as Coretek to help manage that and keep that secure in that space. The next level up is platform as a service, also known as PaaS, where Microsoft is managing the entire stack, including the operating system and middleware and runtime. And what you're responsible for ultimately is the application itself and the data. And that's really optimal, because then you can really focus on making sure your application's functioning how you need it to for your business, and not worry so much about the day-to-day care and feeding of the actual infrastructure itself. And then as you continue down the stack, you look at SaaS, or software provider, where it's entirely managed by the vendor. Like a good example is Office 365 or Exchange Online. Some other common strategies that are used, so some other terms we will use throughout this, is rehost, refactor, re-architect, or rebuild as a migration strategy. So when you're rehosting, it is also commonly referred to as a lift and shift, or redeploy as is in the cloud. So take the existing server and move it up into Azure. Refactor, where you will start using some PaaS services and in a lot of cases some IaaS services, depending on the applications you have running, and it's really a common place that we see people going today. That way they can take advantage of at least some of the platform services and reduce their cost and complexity of supporting the environment. and really take advantage of a lot of the cloud features, but still have minimal effort to be able to get up into Azure. You could re-architect your applications or application, depending on the scenario, where you're making big changes to really take advantage of key cloud technologies and solutions. Moving from different types of reporting services to like a Power BI service or something along those lines, leveraging logic apps and other microservices that really give cloud technologies really scalable and simplified development processes. So you could re-architect and use some of those, or you can completely rebuild it and write it completely cloud native, where code is completely pushed 100% to Azure from the actual application code all the way through the infrastructure code, so you can stand up and shut down environments really, really quickly and securely. And there's a lot of advantages to that as well. But as you're really thinking about a migration strategy specifically, you typically are sitting in the rehost or refactor methodology. When you start talking about re-architect and rebuild, you're really talking about specific applications. So inside of your organization, you may look at re-architecting or rebuilding an application or two, but you don't want to do that as a holistic approach. Today, we're going to focus on migration strategies from your data center and into Azure, which will focus really on the rehost and refactor methodologies. As you're starting to align your best practices for your migration, it's still about people, process, and technology. One of the key things I would really recommend setting up in the people phase, and we'll get into this as part of the Coretek migration methodology here shortly, is setting up an actual cloud center of excellence. That's really critical to do, and we'll talk about a little bit more as to why. From a planning and process size, definitely make sure you have your business case with your executive sponsors. It's really, really critical to understand that. We'll talk through some specifics around that. And understand what migration strategies you're actually going to use. Are you migrating a small amount of applications or application and looking at doing things like re-architecting or rebuilding, or are you looking at truly migrating your data center and a lot of infrastructure where you're looking at a rehost and a refactor migration methodology? And then obviously picking the right technologies, and we'll talk through some of that. Coretek's really broken it down from a migration methodology into 5 simple phases: assess, plan, migrate, manage, and optimize. And that can be from migrating from on-prem in a local data center, a colo, whether it be a hosted data center or fully managed, or it could be from another cloud provider such as like an AWS. Still go through these general phases is really important. So as we really start diving in, we're going to dive into the assess phase. The critical piece of the assess phase is really looking at what's the total cost of ownership. And we identify that by doing what's called a cloud economic assessment. And as you're starting that cloud economic assessment, the first thing to really understand is, what are your motivations? Why are you actually moving to the cloud? What is the business value or it's the business reason that's motivating you to look at it? Is it cost savings? I think everybody would say, I would love cost savings. But is that the real reason why you're moving to the cloud? Or are you looking at it as that being a factor, but you really want to increase your agility so you can scale up and down a lot easier, especially in these times that we have now? Or is it to scale your environment? Is it to enable new innovations or get access to your data easier so that you can make more business insight decisions? And having your infrastructure running up in Azure can really help you with a lot of that kind of stuff. And then also associating those business outcomes with what your journey actually is. So what kind of outcomes are you really looking for? Are you looking for financial agility, reach? Are you looking to connect with people more? Are you looking for engagement with your consumers or your customers? performance? What are you really looking and what are you expecting the outcomes? And it's so important to really understand this because you need to have a guiding star for you to be able to know where are you really going and what are your real objectives as you're going down the cloud journey. Why are you doing this and what outcomes are you really looking to achieve? It's so important to do. We recommend doing that throughout your migration process, reevaluating and making sure you're still meeting those on a regular basis. As you go into the cloud economic assessment, really the ultimate result of this is to understand your infrastructure and your applications and your data and understand the cloud readiness of it. So there's a lot of different tools to use out there. Usually it's anywhere from a 2 to 6 week type project that's ran for duration. It's not that intensive. It's just the way that the tool sets work for scanning the environment. But you're ultimately looking at what infrastructure can be moved into Azure, and then right sizing it so that you can get accurate cost, so you can come up with good cost consumption estimates. And what the future plan should look like as far as migrating to Azure. So what should go to IaaS? What should go to PaaS? Identifying how you're going to look at that in that cloud economic assessment. A really critical step. Sometimes people skip this step. Highly recommend it. There are a lot of tools out there. There are free ones. Azure Migrate can do it as one. Mover does it really well if you're working with your Microsoft account team. There are a lot of other third-party tools out there as well, like Unified Cloud and some other ones. But definitely highly recommend going through this process just to really understand what you have, what your digital estate looks like, what the cloud readiness of that digital estate is, what the cost would be moving it up into Azure, and then also what your roadmap and your plan ultimately looks like. As we jump into the plan phase, the biggest thing to identify out of this is the cloud adoption framework. So the cloud adoption framework is a framework that Microsoft has developed to give you an easy path to really understand what needs to occur from a methodology perspective in order to get your infrastructure or your applications up into Azure and make sure that you govern and manage them long term. There's some great information out there on azure.com/cloud adoption framework, also known as CAF, C-A-F. So you may hear me reference that every now and again. Some of the key things to make sure you do, we've already talked about the strategy side in the actual assess phase, which understanding your motivations, your business outcomes, and your justification and building your actual prioritization of what applications and projects need to occur. But then also moving into the plan phase and really getting that complete understanding of your digital estate. That's all part of that cloud economic assessment. But then going into your skills readiness plan. How are you going to get your team members ready to be able to support Azure? And that could be developers, that could be on the IT side. There's a lot of great resources out there for it. The cloud adoption framework gives you some good reference guides for it. Definitely Microsoft Learn's a big one that Microsoft's invests a lot in. There are other things you can do, such as lean on a partner of yours to either help you and your staff come up to speed or augment you while you come up to speed, or look at outsourcing so your team can holistically focus on the business and the things that you need them to really focus on. But really, there's a lot of options there from a skills readiness plan. Documenting your cloud adoption plan. There's a really good template there for documenting and identifying exactly what your adoption plan should look like. When you move into the ready phase of the CAF, you're ultimately designing your Azure environment, setting up your security and your controls and policies, and building that first landing zone or that first Azure subscription that you're working with. And it could be the only one you ever have, or you could have dozens. I know customers that have had over 100 for various reasons. Most customers sit between 2 to 10, give or take, depending on the scenario and the size of the organization. But either way, there's a lot of great things you can do with it if you design your Azure environment correctly and build that core landing zone. You can have standard blueprints and policies that you apply and force on all the different subscriptions to ensure your security controls are in place, and you set it up so that you're set up optimally and consistently across all the landing zones or subscriptions. You move into the adopt phase, whether you're migrating or innovating. In today's conversation, we're talking about migrating and looking at going through a true data center migration overall. And then govern and manage, and setting up all those guidelines and plans around how are you baselining your security? How are you measuring that on a regular basis? And there's a lot of great tools out there for that, which we'll get into. As you go through the migration, Coretek, we leverage ASR, Azure Site Recovery, or Database Migration Services, the DMS tool from Microsoft to migrate different Azure SQL databases, or migrate SQL databases to Azure. That's what we use. ASR is Microsoft's disaster recovery tool. You could also leverage Azure Migrate. We just have written a lot of scripts and automation around leveraging ASR, but Azure Migrate really has come a long way and can be, the vision of Microsoft is for that to be a one-stop shop for you for migrations. There are other tools out there you could use. You could use things like Veeam or Commvault or one of your, or Zerto, one of your backup and DR solutions. Depending on the robustness of the application or of the tool, you could possibly use those for migrations as well, depending on what you're really looking at doing. So things to consider when you're looking at a lift and shift or a rehost migration. Really, the idea here is to move it as is and copy the server bit by bit up to Azure, and make sure it's synchronized so you can just cut over. It's really ideal. It's an ideal way if you don't know what you need to do. It's a great way to get started, get you in Azure, get you functioning, get you that cost reduction overall from your on-prem infrastructure, get you running in Azure, and then allow you to optimize it later depending on the scenario and the application. As we go through a data center migration, we use a 5-week migration process per migration group. A migration group is a set of servers. So depending on the size of your environment, it may be most of your servers, or it might be 20 servers. It might be 50 servers. It really depends on your organization and your migration plan. But ultimately what it is having a set methodology, and whatever you choose to do, I definitely recommend using this methodology. At the end of this, I'll provide my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me if you want a copy of this as well to set your own. Happy to share it. But ultimately, setting a T-3, T-2, T-1, and T-0, the actual migration week, and then T+1, and making sure you have a plan around what needs to happen with each set of applications and servers. So for example, in T-3, you got to really decide, are you going to do IaaS or PaaS for the workload? And it really depends on the complexity and what needs to change to move it to PaaS. Again, assuming cost makes sense, which it does most of the time, moving it to a PaaS service is best, but you got to balance that with work effort to get it ready to run in the PaaS service. So validating all the dependencies and making sure you understand all the interconnections that particular application or workload is communicating with, what servers it's communicating with. And there are a lot of good tools. Azure Migrate can tell you that, Cloud Economic Assessment can tell you a lot of that data as well. They can even get down to tell you what data, what service is communicating with that server, which services it's communicating over. And then start the server replication. That way you have plenty of time to make sure that there's data transfer and that server and data and applications are all up in Azure and synchronized and stay synchronized throughout the next couple of weeks. And then you go into actually in week 2, going through your standard ITIL processes, looking at things like your test plan and submitting change controls. And then if there are any firewalls or network changes that need to occur, getting that all planned for properly for any sort of routing changes that need to happen. And then testing the application. One of the great things about ASR, one of the reasons why we really love using ASR is you can actually fail over in an isolated environment and test the migration before it's actually occurring to see how it's working for you as a customer. And see how the actual application functions, so fully certain that it is working as expected. And then making your go, no-go decision in T-1, T-0, jumping into the actual week of the migration and actually performing the migration, and then T+1, doing any sort of cleanup activities or transitioning to ongoing support, making sure that all occurs. So this is our standard 5-week process. We do change it customer to customer depending on specific nuances, but from a super high level, this is a really good standard process to use as you're going through. Again, you may have one migration group, maybe a pilot, and then a migration group, or you may have 50 migration groups and stack them week over week, where you have multiple groups running simultaneously, but maybe in different weeks. So definitely a lot of good options here, but good foundational plan for you. Ultimately, you can move most workloads. The question is, should you? But you can move most workloads, and that cloud economic assessment really will tell you whether it's viable to run in Azure. And there's some other considerations to look at depending on your use case and your application sets and age and way they communicate. But that economic assessment will give you a lot of that information and will help you see, okay, we can migrate, or if we migrate, we may need to add in like an SD-WAN to help with bandwidth connectivity across all of our sites. So there's a lot of really good options there, but definitely ASR, Azure Migrate, Azure Database Assistance, great tools, native tools that are free for you to leverage. Then we go into the manage phase, where you're really starting to monitor and support your infrastructure. You're really stabilizing it. One of the things I love about moving to the cloud is you have the ability to reset some of your organizational history and your good and bad habits that you want to continue, whichever ones those are that you want to continue. What I love is you have the ability to really reset your security posture through this and look at different ways to secure your environment. You don't have to carry a bunch of your legacy rules and guidelines into when you're moving to Azure. You do have to secure your environment, just to be clear, but there's a lot of different new ways to do it that will give you more agility and comfort and visibility into the security of the environment, just with native tool sets inside of Azure, as well as third-party tool sets that add on top of Azure. So when you're going into setting up the management, again, we talked about the Cloud Center of Excellence. It's so important to set up and really make sure you have not just technical individuals in the Cloud Center of Excellence, but also business individuals. And the reason why it's so important to have representatives from the business is because you want their input on things you can do from an innovation perspective with being in the cloud now. You want their input on how to improve services that are being delivered to them, and vision of that. And that's really where I see IT going, is more of a business enabler, more and more and more, which I love about where things are going with this. Understanding what tools to use are really important. So when people talk about governance, by the way, this can be found at azure.com/cap/gov, which is ultimately the governance section. But what I love is there's 5 key principles: cost management, so understanding your costs, understanding showbacks and chargebacks. If you are not at a place in your organization where you can charge back departments or applications for usage of infrastructure and data, you should at least show that cost. That way you can look over time and you can make, again, your business can make intelligent decisions. If a department is producing the least out of the organization, but costs the most from an IT spend, that may be something worth looking at and evaluating. Does it make sense for that department or line of business, or what have you? Or does it make sense to try to rein in some of that spending a little bit more? Showbacks are so powerful. There's a lot of ways you can do that with cost management, with tagging and resource groups and designs and things that you figure out as you're going through that real CAF design piece. I mentioned security baseline, so making sure that your security baseline is intact and that you're following your standard processes on a regular basis and compliance procedures. Resource consistency, this is a big one. So enforcing your onboarding and recovery and discoverability practices inside of your infrastructure as you deploy it. So people start getting more and more into infrastructure as code as part of this, so they can deploy truly standard infrastructure and templates of their server and applications. A lot of people look at architectural patterns and say, developers, I've got this SQL and app service standard configuration that you're allowed to use, so you don't even need to come to IT infrastructure team anyway to deploy this. You just need to request it and deploy through Azure DevOps and pipelines these standard configurations. So they're called architectural patterns that can give that you can give developers a secure way to guarantee control and the security baseline and cost management and all the other policies you need in that infrastructure, and enable them to do more with it. Identity baseline, so really identity is the biggest piece and the biggest security vulnerability going out there in general. That is the biggest risk to every business, is identity management. I fundamentally believe if you can secure the identity and really control that, you can do so much with securing your environment. Deployment acceleration. So how do you ensure consistency and standardization across all of your lines of business? And that goes back into the infrastructure code and DevOps piece. And then finally, we get into the optimization phase. And that's where you're really looking at, how do I modernize my application more? How do I continue that innovation? How do I do cost optimizations? Maybe I move my servers at a certain size of infrastructure, but really I could reduce that cost. I really don't need 8 gigs on each server. Maybe I only need 4 gigs of RAM, or whatever the case may be. And there's all kinds of tools that'll help tell you that, from Azure Advisor, Azure Monitor. There's so many different tool sets that will help you with that. But how do you really optimize that cost? Do you look at reserved instances for infrastructure? Do you look at right-sizing PaaS services? How do you right-size that performance as well, and baselining that and understanding, you want cost optimization, but you also have to maintain that performance and balancing that, and then of course operationalizing your security posture, whatever that looks like for you. A simple way to get started on the app modernization side is an app modernization engagement. And ultimately, these innovation engagements, generally, if you're a managed Microsoft customer, you potentially can be eligible for an application innovation engagement, and ultimately Microsoft will work with you and a partner to assess up to 5 applications and help you get those applications migrated to Azure in a modern way. So whether they're on-prem or in Azure, you're able to go through and you're able to look at the actual code of the application and see if you can move it to a modern PaaS service or what it would take to do so. Some of the key things that we use is we use a tool called Unified Cloud for this. It's a really good tool to allow us to really get into the code of the application and understand what's actually happening and what calls are really compatible with modern cloud native tools or services. Look at things like cost management and migration effort estimates. So if we have to remediate 20 of these bugs, what's the effort on it? It does a really good job of that. And then obviously your app and your DB readiness and really getting into the application overall. One other thing to mention related to the Azure application modernization, there's also a program, again, if you're a Microsoft managed customer, a program called DPI 30 that basically can do the same thing for the data side and get you into the modern data warehouse side of things inside of Azure. So if you want to get more out of your data and you want to do more with it, that's a good program to look at as well. And so ultimately, how do you get started? So you can get started by going to the Azure CAF and start going through that process. You can also contact Coretek through coretek.com/contact. In addition, you can reach out to me directly, and I'll have that up here in a second as well. Ultimately, we want to help our customers and help people innovate and get their resources up in Azure. We can help you with migrations, app modernization, or data and analytics platforms, depending on what you're really looking to do. Ultimately, feel free, reach out to me. If you have any questions, you can contact me on LinkedIn. You can find me easily from Clint Adkins on LinkedIn. You can also go to our website and you can download a in-depth ebook about Azure migrations, 5 key steps to your migrations. It goes through each of these steps in a little bit more detail. With that, thank you everybody for attending. Kevin, let you wrap it up.
Yeah, so we do have a couple of questions here that we'll run through quickly, but just a reminder as we sort of go through these, there's still time to get your questions in. So we'll take, there's 2 here at the moment, but if any others pop up, I'll certainly get those asked and answered for you as well. But quickly, Clint, here taking a look, we have one question around, do we support both a on-premise and cloud approach? So it's looking like here that, yeah, I'll let you go ahead and answer.
Sure. Yeah. So absolutely. So ultimately, do we support on-prem and cloud approach? So a hybrid approach is what that's typically referred to. Yes, absolutely. Most organizations aren't able to fully move into Azure or a cloud in general. There are reasons to keep something on-prem. And that could be that you've recently purchased a set of hardware or upgraded data center infrastructure or something, and the financials just don't make sense, or a specific application needs to reside on-prem for latency or something that's really sensitive that needs to sit. Generally speaking, we can find solutions for that. But yes, absolutely, a hybrid approach is important. There are, in larger organizations, there are really good tool sets you can use. There's a lot of VMware integrations to Azure. So you could actually, if you're an advanced VMware shop, you can actually leverage VMware to migrate workloads between Azure and on-prem in a hybrid fashion, so it can truly optimize it on a consistent basis. But great question.
And then the other one we have here is around if I'm already engaged with someone from Microsoft, can I work with Coretek as well?
Yes, absolutely. So feel free, reach out to me directly. Let your Microsoft rep know that you'd like to work with Coretek, and they can get a hold of us as well. Yeah, definitely, absolutely. So we frequently work with Microsoft. We work hand in hand to get their customers up to Azure.
Fantastic. I'm not seeing any other questions come in, so we'll go ahead and we'll wrap things up here. I know we had scheduled out to 3 o'clock, but just wanted to make sure we had plenty of time to go through the material here, and weren't sure what sort of questions we would get, so always wanted to save time. But with the presentation being wrapped up and no further questions, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we will be sending out a recording here as well as the slide deck for your reference. So whether you're taking a look back or you're viewing it on demand, you'll have access to both of those assets. And inside of there, of course, are ways to connect with Coretek and Clint directly. So please feel free if you have any questions or concerns, happy to help out there. And our next Tech Tuesday webinar will be hosted this upcoming Tuesday, February 2nd. And will actually be, this is a first for us. It is a webinar that is focused on Microsoft Teams live events, and we'll actually, we're hosting today's webinar through GoToWebinar, but for that we'll actually be utilizing the live events feature of Microsoft Teams to host that particular event. So there will also be, when we send out the recording and the slide deck here, we'll include a link for you to sign up to that webinar as well if you're interested in seeing what Microsoft Teams live events are all about. With that, I want to thank everybody who did attend today's webinar, and for all of you that are watching on demand, appreciate you for registering. And Clint, also want to say thank you to you for walking us through this presentation today. A lot of great information, and I hope everyone found it helpful.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.
Yep, everyone have a great afternoon, and we'll catch you during the next webinar. Bye-bye.